Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave with words, entirely blind to who is holding the shovel? In a world where entitlement runs rampant, one woman at John F. Kennedy International Airport thought she could publicly humiliate a quiet, sharply dressed black man for simply existing in a first-class lounge. She assumed he was out of place. She assumed he was nobody. What she didn't know was that this nobody wasn't just flying in first class. He practically owned the airline. Buckle up, because this transatlantic flight ends with a masterclass in hard karma that will leave you absolutely speechless. The atmosphere inside the Sapphire Premier Lounge at JFK International Airport was a carefully curated symphony of privilege. Soft jazz piped through invisible speakers. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes punctuated the low hum of hushed conversations, and the scent of freshly roasted artisan espresso hung heavy in the air. David Henderson sat in a secluded corner booth, his eyes tracing the intricate financial projections on his glowing tablet. At 42, David carried the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who had built an empire from scratch. He wore a tailored charcoal Brioni suit, no tie, the top two buttons of his crisp white shirt undone, projecting an image of understated elegance. He was currently reviewing the final merger documents for Aero Global Holdings, the parent company of the very airline he was flying today. In less than 24 hours, once he landed in London, the ink would dry, and he would officially be the majority shareholder and incoming chairman of the board. He took a sip of his sparkling water, savoring the rare moment of stillness before the storm of corporate restructuring began. That stillness was shattered by the sharp, rapid clicking of Christian Louboutin heels. Chloe Harper was a woman who entered rooms as though she had a divine right to own them. Dripping in conspicuous designer logos, a Gucci belt that was slightly too loud, a pristine white Chanel blazer, and an oversized Louis Vuitton tote, she radiated a nervous, aggressive energy. Trailing behind her was her husband, Greg, a man whose permanent slouch and vacant expression suggested a lifetime of apologizing for his wife's behavior. The lounge was unusually crowded that evening due to a string of weather delays. Every plush, leather armchair and marble-topped table was occupied. Every table, except the empty chair directly across from David. Chloe stopped at David's table, her eyes darting from his dark skin to his relaxed posture, and then to the empty seat. Her upper lip curled into a subtle, undeniable sneer of disdain. She did not ask if the seat was taken. She did not offer a polite greeting. "Excuse me," Chloe said, her voice piercing through the ambient jazz. "You need to move your things. My husband and I require this table." David briefly looked up from his tablet, assuming she was simply stressed. "I'm afraid. I'm using this space to work, ma'am. There are usually some open seats near the dining buffet." Chloe's eyes widened, as if the concept of being told no was a foreign language. "I don't think you understand," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. She leaned in closer, her heavy, floral perfume assaulting David's senses. "This is the first class and Diamond Elite Lounge. It's for premium-paying members. I don't know whose guest passes you managed to score, or if you're waiting to clean the tables, but Greg and I have actual business to attend to, so pack up." Greg shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. "Chloe, maybe we should just check the bar." "Quiet, Greg," she snapped without looking at him. Her gaze remained fixed on David, her eyes narrowed with a toxic mix of suspicion and entitlement. David slowly locked his tablet and set it down. He had experienced this specific brand of microaggression more times than he cared to count in his ascent up the corporate ladder. The assumption that his presence in a space of luxury was a glitch in the system. "I am well aware of the lounge's entry requirements," David said, his voice a calm, deep baritone that refused to rise to her frantic frequency. "I am a ticketed passenger, and I was here first. I suggest you speak to the concierge if you need seating assistance." Chloe scoffed loudly, drawing the attention of a nearby businessman and a couple reading magazines. "Oh, please. You expect me to believe you're flying first class? Let me see your boarding pass." "I have absolutely no obligation to show you anything," David replied, a glacial chill entering his polite tone. Before Chloe could escalate further, a lounge attendant, a young woman in a crisp uniform, hurried over, sensing the rising tension. "Is there a problem here, Mrs. Harper?" Chloe crossed her arms triumphantly. "Yes, Maria. This gentleman is refusing to give up this table, and I highly suspect he doesn't even belong in this lounge. Could you please check his credentials?" He's making me deeply uncomfortable. The attendant turned to David, her expression apologetic. I'm so sorry, sir. May I just quickly see your pass to clear this up? David didn't argue. He calmly pulled up the digital boarding pass on his phone and held it out. The attendant scanned it with her handheld device. The screen didn't just flash the standard green check mark. It pulsed with a solid gold border, a security clearance tier so rare, the attendant visibly gasped. It was the internal code for a board member or executive VIP. "I'm Mr. Henderson," the attendant stammered, her posture immediately straightening into a rigid bow. "I am so incredibly sorry for the disturbance. Can I get you anything? Another Pellegrino? Perhaps some hot food?" "I'm perfectly fine, thank you," David said with a gracious nod. Chloe's jaw tightened. She looked from the attendant to David, her face flushing an angry, mottled red. "Whatever," she muttered, grabbing Greg by the sleeve. "This airline's standards have completely plummeted. They just let anyone in here now." As she stomped away, David simply reopened his tablet. The first battle was won, but the war of the transatlantic flight hadn't even begun. An hour later, Gate 42 was a swarm of restless passengers waiting for the red-eye flight to Heathrow. David stood quietly off to the side, his leather duffel bag slung over one shoulder, scrolling through an email from his lead legal counsel. "Ladies and gentlemen," the automated PA system chimed. "We are now beginning the boarding process for Flight 884 to London. We invite our first-class passengers, Diamond Elite members, and those needing special assistance to board through the priority lane at this time." David slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and walked toward the stanchions, marking the priority lane. He was the third person in line. Suddenly, a sharp elbow jabbed into his ribs. "Excuse us. Priority boarding. Coming through." It was Chloe Harper. She shoved past a bewildered elderly couple and aggressively wedged herself into the line directly in front of David, dragging a mortified Greg behind her. She didn't look back to see who she had elbowed until she was settled in place. When she turned and locked eyes with David, her expression hardened. "You again?" she hissed, her voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "Are you incapable of reading signs? This is Group 1, first class. You need to step aside and wait for Group 4 or 5, or whatever economy class you're actually in." David brushed his suit jacket where she had bumped him. "Mrs. Harper, isn't it? I am in the correct line. I suggest you face forward and prepare your boarding pass." "Don't patronize me," Chloe snapped, her voice escalating into a shrill register. "I saw that little stunt you pulled in the lounge. You probably know the bartender. But they actually scan tickets here at the gate. You're holding up the line for people who actually paid $10,000 to be here." Gate agent Michael Torres, a seasoned veteran of airport meltdowns, stepped up to the podium. "Next passenger, please," he called out, trying to keep the line moving. Chloe stepped up to the scanner, slapping her paper boarding pass onto the glass. It beeped green. She turned back to David with a smug, triumphant smile. "Go ahead," she taunted. "Let's see it." Michael Torres frowned at Chloe's behavior but maintained his professional composure. "Sir, whenever you're ready." David stepped forward. He didn't even glance at Chloe. He tapped his phone against the scanner. Instead of the standard chirp, the machine emitted a distinct, melodic three-tone chime. Michael Torres immediately snapped his head up, his eyes widening as he read the screen. The monitor flashed. "MR. David Henderson. Seat 1A. VIP. Aero Global Executive. Welcome back, Mr. Henderson," Michael said, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of profound respect. "The captain has already been notified. You are flying with us tonight. Have a wonderful flight." "Thank you, Michael," David replied warmly. "I appreciate the hard work tonight." Chloe, standing just past the podium, looked as if she had swallowed a lemon. Her eyes darted wildly. "Wait," she demanded, rounding on Michael. "What was that sound? Why did his ticket make a different sound? Is he getting an upgrade?" "Because my husband and I are Diamond members, and if anyone gets upgraded, it should be us." "Ma'am," Michael said firmly, blocking her from stepping back toward the podium. "Mr. Henderson is ticketed in his rightful seat. I need you to proceed down the jet bridge. You are holding up the line." Chloe let out a dramatic, exasperated sigh, whipping out her phone as she stomped down the jet bridge. "Unbelievable," she barked into her phone, apparently leaving a voice memo for someone. "The sheer incompetence of this airline." They are letting absolute riffraff skip the lines. I am writing to corporate the second we land. Heads are going to roll. David followed at a comfortable distance, his face an impassive mask. He listened to her threats to write to corporate. A faint, ironic smile touched the corners of his mouth. Write all the letters you want, Chloe, he thought to himself. By tomorrow morning, those letters will be coming directly to my desk. The interior of the Boeing 777 first-class cabin was a sanctuary of modern aviation luxury. The space was divided into private, high-walled suites featuring lie-flat beds, massive entertainment screens, and mahogany-trimmed consoles. David found his suite, 1A, located at the very front of the cabin by the window. He stowed his duffel in the overhead bin, settled into the plush leather seat, and immediately pulled out his tablet to resume his work. A few moments later, the heavy thud of luggage and high-pitched complaining announced the arrival of Chloe and Greg. I explicitly told my assistant to book us 2 window suites. Chloe was complaining loudly to the flight attendant in the aisle. Why is Greg in 2B and I am in 2D? This is the middle section. I refuse to sit in the middle section. Ma'am, the cabin is completely full tonight, the flight attendant replied patiently. Those were the last 2 seats available at the time of your booking. Chloe huffed and shoved her bags into the bin above 2D, but her eyes began scanning the cabin. She noticed David sitting quietly in 1A, the prime window suite. Her eyes narrowed. To Chloe, the universe was a machine designed to serve her. If she wanted a window seat and someone she deemed lesser possessed one, a correction was mandatory. She marched up to suite 1A, looming over the partition. All right, that's enough, Chloe said, clapping her hands together sharply to get David's attention. David looked up, pausing his music on his noise-canceling headphones. Can I help you? You're in my seat, she lied smoothly, her chin tilted upward in defiance. There's been a mix-up. My husband and I need the window suites. You need to gather your things and move back to 2D. I'm sure you don't mind the middle. It's practically identical. David stared at her, genuinely astounded by her audacity. Mrs. Harper. We have already established at the gate that my ticket is for this specific suite. I am not moving. Look, Chloe lowered her voice, attempting to sound menacing. I know how this works. You complained, you played a card, and they bumped you up here to avoid a scene. But I am paying customer. My husband is a senior partner at a major law firm. If you don't move right now, I will have you forcibly removed from this flight for harassment. David didn't flinch. He slowly took off his headphones and placed them on the console. Harassment? He repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. You approached me in the lounge. You assaulted me in the boarding line. And now you are standing in my personal space, demanding a seat that does not belong to you, threatening me with false allegations. Excuse me, Chloe shrieked, instantly deploying her loudest victim voice. Her sudden outburst caused several passengers to poke their heads out of their suites. Help! Flight attendant, this man is threatening me. Sarah Jenkins, the lead purser for the first-class cabin, rushed over immediately. She was a professional with 20 years of flying experience. What seems to be the problem here? This man, Chloe pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at David's face, stole my window seat, and when I politely asked him to check his ticket, he became incredibly aggressive. I feel entirely unsafe. I want him removed from this airplane immediately. Sarah looked from the hyperventilating Chloe to the perfectly calm David. She pulled out her digital manifest. Ma'am, let me check the seating arrangement, Sarah said calmly. She tapped her screen. Mrs. Harper, you are assigned to 2D. Mr. Henderson is assigned to 1A. He is exactly where he is supposed to be. Your machine is wrong, Chloe yelled, stomping her foot like a petulant toddler. Do you have any idea who we are? We fly this route 6 times a year. He is clearly unhinged and doesn't belong here. Greg finally scurried over, grabbing his wife's arm. Chloe, please, let's just sit down. The middle is fine. Let go of me, Greg. Chloe ripped her arm away. She turned her venom back to Sarah. I demand to speak to the captain, right now. I am not flying across the Atlantic with a violent criminal sitting in the front row. Get the captain out here, or I am calling the police and having this entire airline sued into bankruptcy. David leaned back in his leather seat, his eyes locked onto Chloe's unhinged display. The trap was set. She had demanded the one man on the plane who knew exactly who David was. By all means, David said smoothly, gesturing toward the cockpit door. Let's get the captain. The heavy, reinforced cockpit door clicked and swung outward. Stepping into the softly lit first-class galley was Captain Richard Davies. A veteran pilot with silver hair and 4 gold stripes gleaming on his epaulets, Captain Davies carried an air of absolute, unquestionable authority. He had flown for Aero Global for almost 30 years, and he had exactly zero tolerance for delays caused by unruly passengers. Sarah, the lead purser, intercepted him halfway down the aisle, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. She gestured subtly toward Suite 1A and the hyperventilating woman standing beside it. Chloe saw him approaching and immediately straightened her Chanel blazer, her face contorting into a mask of distressed victimhood. She pushed past Sarah, practically throwing herself into the captain's path. Captain. Finally, someone with actual authority, Chloe gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if she were on the verge of collapsing. Thank God you're here. This man, she pointed an accusing, trembling finger at David, has stolen my premium window suite, threatened me with physical violence, and is refusing to show his boarding pass. The flight attendants are completely useless and won't do anything about it. I demand he be escorted off this aircraft immediately before we push back. Captain Davies didn't say a word. He didn't look at her pointed finger, nor did he acknowledge her frantic demands. Instead, his eyes moved past her, landing squarely on the man sitting calmly in Suite 1A. David met the captain's gaze. He didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice to defend himself. He simply offered a brief, familiar nod. Captain Davies's posture immediately shifted. The stern, irritated expression of a pilot dealing with a delay vanished, replaced by a look of profound, rigid respect. He bypassed Chloe entirely, stepping up to the edge of Suite 1A. Mr. Henderson, sir, Captain Davies said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly pin-drop silent cabin. I sincerely apologize for this disturbance. Is everything all right over here? Do you require any assistance from my crew? The collective gasp from the surrounding passengers was nearly audible. Chloe froze, her outstretched arms slowly dropping to her side. The gears in her mind grounded to a violent halt. Sir? Everything is fine, Richard, David replied smoothly, using the captain's first name with the easy familiarity of a peer. Mrs. Harper seems to be confused about her seating assignment. I was just hoping we could resolve this quickly so we can get this aircraft in the air. I have an important board meeting in London tomorrow morning. Understood, sir, Captain Davies said with a crisp nod. He then turned slowly to face Chloe. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by a glacial, unyielding stare. Mrs. Harper, the captain began, his voice low but laced with absolute finality. Let me make this abundantly clear to you. You are currently harassing one of our most valued passengers. Mr. Henderson is ticketed for Suite 1A. You are ticketed for Suite 2D. You have exactly 2 choices right now, and I suggest you make your decision in the next 10 seconds. Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Her face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. I am a Diamond Elite member. My husband is. I do not care if your husband is the President of the United States, Captain Davies interrupted, his voice cracking like a whip. Option 1. You return to your assigned seat, 2D, and you remain silent and respectful to my crew and to Mr. Henderson for the remainder of this flight. Option 2. I call Port Authority, have you forcibly offloaded for interfering with a flight crew, and ensure you are permanently placed on Aero Global's no-fly list. What is your choice, Mrs. Harper? Greg, who had been sweating profusely by Suite 2B, finally found his legs. He rushed forward, grabbing Chloe by the elbow with a desperate, white-knuckled grip. She'll sit down, Captain, Greg stammered, his eyes wide with panic. We are so sorry. Chloe, please, walk. Now, for the first time in her pampered life, Chloe Harper had no comeback. Stripped of her perceived power, humiliated in front of the entire first-class cabin, and facing the very real threat of arrest, she allowed her husband to drag her backward. She collapsed into Suite 2D, violently yanking the privacy screen shut. But even through the frosted glass divider, David could practically feel the toxic radiation of her fury. Thank you, Richard, David said quietly as the captain prepared to return to the flight deck. Have a restful flight, Mr. Henderson, the captain replied, touching 2 fingers to his brow in a subtle salute before disappearing behind the reinforced door. An hour later, Flight 884 was cruising smoothly at 36,000 feet over the dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The cabin lights had been dimmed to a soft, ambient blue, and the gentle hum of the jet engines lulled most of the passengers to sleep. Behind the closed privacy screen of Suite 2D, however, Chloe Harper was wide awake. She was seething. The humiliation burned in her chest like swallowed acid. She had been embarrassed, spoken down to, and forced to submit, and worse, it had happened in front of the man she had tried to demean. Her ego, fragile and bloated, demanded immediate retribution. She needed a manager. She needed a corporate execution. Pulling her silver MacBook from her oversized tote bag, she connected to the aircraft's premium Wi-Fi network. Her manicured fingers hovered over the keyboard like talons. "We'll see who has the last laugh," she muttered bitterly to herself. She opened her browser and navigated to the Aero Global Holdings corporate directory. It took her less than 5 minutes of aggressive searching to find what she was looking for. The direct email addresses for the Executive Customer Relations Team, the VP of Operations, and just to ensure maximum damage, the general inbox for the Board of Directors. She opened a new email. The subject line was drafted in all caps. Urgent. Assault and incompetence on Flight 884. Demand for immediate termination. Her fingers flew across the keys, fueled by pure, unadulterated entitlement. She spun a masterpiece of fiction. She claimed that a violent, unticketed man had illegally breached the first-class cabin and stolen her seat. She wrote that the flight crew, including Sarah Jenkins, had stood by and laughed while she was verbally abused. She claimed Captain Richard Davies had been bribed or intimidated by the passenger to force her into a lesser seat. "I have never felt so physically threatened in my life," Chloe typed furiously. "This man clearly did not belong in first class, let alone on this airplane. I demand a full, immediate refund for both my husband's and my tickets, a compensation package of 500,000 frequent flyer miles, and the immediate termination of the captain and the lead purser. Furthermore, I expect this aggressive passenger to be met by police upon our arrival at Heathrow." She attached a photo she had secretly snapped of the back of David's head from the boarding line to ensure security could identify the perpetrator. With a vicious, satisfied smirk, Chloe hit send. She closed her laptop, reclined her lie-flat seat, and closed her eyes, imagining the chaos and apologies that would be waiting for her when she landed. Meanwhile, just a few feet away in Suite 1A, David Henderson was enjoying a glass of vintage Bordeaux. He had finished reviewing the merger documents and had just logged into the secure, encrypted server for Aero Global Holdings. As part of the merger transition, his new corporate email account d.henderson@aeroglobalboard.com had gone live 3 hours ago. All high-level corporate complaints and executive escalations were temporarily being routed to his inbox so he could assess the current state of customer relations. Ping! A notification popped up on the top right corner of his tablet screen. David tapped the icon. He scanned the subject line, Urgent. Assault and incompetence on Flight 884. He raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of his wine. He opened the email. As his eyes tracked down the screen, reading the wildly fabricated accusations, the demands for the termination of the excellent crew, and the attached, slightly blurry photo of the back of his own head, a deep, rumbling chuckle escaped his chest. It was almost too perfect. She hadn't just dug her own grave. She had brought a backhoe and excavated a crater. David set his wine glass down. He tapped Reply All, which included the VP of Operations and the entire board of directors, ensuring they would all witness the execution of his first official executive order. His fingers tapped methodically on the glass screen of his tablet. Dear Mrs. Harper, thank you for reaching out directly to the Executive Board of Aero Global Holdings regarding your experience on Flight 884. We take allegations of crew incompetence and passenger safety very seriously. The ambient hum of the Boeing 777's twin engines provided a steady, white noise backdrop to the rhythmic tapping of David Henderson's fingers against his tablet screen. High above the frigid expanse of the North Atlantic, while the rest of the first-class cabin slept in their lie-flat pods, the incoming chairman of Aero Global Holdings was wide awake. He was in the middle of dismantling a bully with the precise, surgical stroke of corporate diplomacy. He didn't write out of anger. Men who built empires from the ground up rarely acted on raw emotion. They acted on data, leverage, and perfect timing. David swiped away from his email client and opened a secure browser tab. Chloe's frantic, unhinged email had loudly boasted about her husband being a senior partner at a major law firm. It took David exactly 45 seconds on a global legal directory to locate Gregory Harper's professional profile. Greg was indeed a senior partner at Harrison, Caldwell & Shaw, a highly prestigious, aggressively expensive corporate law firm based in Manhattan. David's brow furrowed slightly as he read the name, and then his expression smoothed into a mask of profound, almost cinematic amusement. He took a slow sip of his Bordeaux. Harrison, Caldwell & Shaw. They were the exact external legal counsel Aero Global Holdings had retained 10 months ago to navigate the labyrinthine European regulatory approvals for this very merger. Millions of dollars in billable hours, not to mention Greg's personal year-end partnership bonus, were currently tied directly to David's discretionary approval. The universe, it seemed, had a remarkably wicked sense of humor. Returning to his encrypted corporate inbox, David began to draft his response to Chloe's extravagant list of demands. He didn't just hit reply. He strategically added the VP of Operations, the Chief Legal Officer, Robert Sterling, and his own executive assistant to the thread. He wanted a full, high-level audience for this execution. 2. Chloe Harper, CC, Executive Board, VP Operations, Robert Sterling, Chief Legal Officer. Subject: Urgent. Assault and incompetence on Flight 884. Demand for immediate termination. Dear Mrs. Harper, thank you for contacting the Executive Board of Aero Global Holdings regarding your experience on Flight 884 this evening. We take all allegations regarding passenger safety, cabin security, and crew conduct with the utmost seriousness. As the incoming chairman of the board and majority shareholder of Aero Global Holdings, I make it a personal priority to review severe corporate escalations. I was particularly interested in your detailed, albeit highly creative, account of the events that transpired during boarding and the seating dispute. After reviewing the flight manifest and consulting with our internal protocols, I can confidently assure you that Captain Richard Davies and lead purser Sarah Jenkins acted flawlessly. They strictly adhered to our corporate guidelines regarding unruly, combative, and disruptive passengers. They will not be terminated, nor will they be reprimanded. In fact, upon my arrival in London, I will be placing formal commendations in both of their personnel files for maintaining absolute professionalism under extreme and unwarranted duress. As for the violent, unticketed man in Suite 1A, whom you have accused of assault, theft, and corporate espionage, I can verify with absolute certainty that his ticket was valid and his presence was requested by the board. I know this to be true because I am the passenger in Suite 1A. Aero Global Holdings maintains a strict, zero-tolerance policy regarding the harassment of our staff and our guests. Because you verbally assaulted the flight crew, deliberately disrupted the boarding process, and fabricated malicious, defamatory allegations against a fellow passenger to extort financial compensation, your Diamond Elite status has been immediately and permanently revoked. Furthermore, effective upon your arrival at London Heathrow Terminal 5, both you and your husband are permanently banned from flying with Aero Global Holdings, as well as any of our global subsidiary airlines. Additionally, I will be reaching out directly to the managing partners at Harrison, Caldwell & Shaw first thing tomorrow morning regarding our ongoing legal retainers. We require partners who reflect our core corporate values of integrity and respect, and the conduct displayed tonight brings those shared values into serious question. British authorities have been notified of your federal disruptions. They will be waiting at the gate to escort you off the aircraft, ensuring a safe and peaceful deplaning process for the rest of our valued passengers. We wish you the best of luck with your future, non-Aero Global travel arrangements. Sincerely, David Henderson, Chairman of the Board, Aero Global Holdings. David read over the email twice, ensuring every single word was legally airtight and utterly devastating. He didn't hit send immediately. Doing so now would give her time to panic while still in the air, potentially causing another scene. Instead, he utilized his email client's scheduling feature. He set the dispatch time for exactly 6:45 a.m. London time, the precise estimated moment. Flight 884's wheels were scheduled to touch down on the tarmac. He locked his tablet, the screen fading to black. He placed it securely in his leather duffel bag, reclined his seat into a fully flat bed, and pulled the plush duvet over his shoulders. For the first time all week, accompanied by the gentle rocking of the aircraft, the chairman slept like a baby. The pale, slate-gray light of a damp London morning began to bleed through the triple-paned windows of the Boeing 777. As Flight 884 initiated its final, sweeping descent over the English countryside, the ambient blue lighting in the first-class cabin softly shifted to a warmer, sunrise hue. The subtle mechanical hum of the landing gear deploying vibrated through the floorboards, signaling the imminent end of the transatlantic journey. In Suite 1A, David Henderson awoke feeling remarkably refreshed. He had managed a solid 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep after dispatching what was arguably the most satisfying email of his professional career. He pressed the button to bring his lie-flat bed back into an upright position, rolled his shoulders, and accepted a warm, lavender-scented towel from Sarah Jenkins, the lead purser, who offered him a bright, knowing smile. David wiped his hands, adjusted the cuffs of his crisp white shirt, and slipped his tailored charcoal suit jacket back on. He looked precisely like a man who was about to step off an airplane and take ownership of a multi-billion-dollar global aviation empire. Because he was, just a few feet away, behind the frosted privacy divider of Suite 2D, a very different kind of morning routine was unfolding. Chloe Harper was already awake. In truth, she hadn't slept much at all. She had spent the last several hours vibrating with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline, indignation, and anticipation. She had spent the flight rehearsing exactly how the next hour of her life was going to play out. In her mind's eye, the scenario was perfectly scripted. As soon as the plane parked at the gate, a team of profusely apologetic Aeroglobal corporate representatives would board the aircraft. They would bypass the other passengers, offer her a pristine voucher for hundreds of thousands of frequent flyer miles, and personally escort her and Greg off the plane. Meanwhile, airport security, perhaps even armed police, would drag the arrogant, sharply dressed man in Suite 1A out of his seat in handcuffs, punishing him for his absolute audacity in defying her. She pulled out a compact mirror from her Louis Vuitton tote, carefully reapplying her designer lipstick and smoothing out the wrinkles in her Chanel blazer. She wanted to look immaculate for her victory lap. "Wake up, Greg," Chloe snapped, jabbing her husband in the ribs. Greg stirred in Suite 2B, rubbing his eyes and groaning. He looked terrible. The stress of his wife's relentless tirades, combined with the uncomfortable knowledge that she had just escalated a petty seating dispute to the executive board of a major corporation, had left him with a pounding migraine. "We're almost there," Chloe whispered loudly over the partition, her eyes shining with manic glee. "Get your bags ready. I want to be the first ones off, right after they haul that man away. I told you, Greg. You can't let these people walk all over you. You have to demand respect." Greg sighed heavily, running a hand over his thinning hair. "Chloe, please, let's just get through customs and get to the hotel. We have that dinner with the European regulators tonight. I need to review the merger files for the firm." "Oh, relax," she dismissed him with a wave of her manicured hand. "Your firm practically runs this city. They can wait while we get this sorted. I am not letting this go." With a heavy mechanical thud, the plane's massive wheels finally kissed the tarmac at London Heathrow. The reverse thrusters roared to life, pressing the passengers back into their seats as the aircraft rapidly decelerated. As the plane turned off the runway and began its slow, winding taxi toward Terminal 5, the familiar chime of the public address system echoed through the cabin. However, instead of the standard, cheerful welcome from the flight attendants, it was the deep, authoritative voice of Captain Richard Davies that filled the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow. The local time is 6:45 a.m. For your safety, please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened." The captain paused. The silence that followed was heavy and unnatural. When he spoke again, his tone was entirely stripped of its usual customer service warmth. It was pure, unyielding command. "We have a special request from the local authorities. Once the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate, all passengers must remain in their seats. Do not stand. Do not open the overhead bins. Metropolitan Police will be boarding the aircraft immediately to handle a serious security matter. We appreciate your total compliance and patience." A collective, nervous murmur rippled through the first-class cabin. A businessman in Suite 3A exchanged a worried glance with his colleague. An elderly couple in row 4 instinctively tightened their seatbelts. Chloe, however, leaned over her divider, practically vibrating with excitement. She grabbed Greg's arm, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. "Did you hear that?" she hissed, a triumphant, euphoric smile stretching across her face. "They actually called the police. I told you, Greg. I emailed the board of directors, and they are not messing around. That man in the front is going to rot in a British holding cell for what he did to me." Greg felt a cold, sharp knot of dread form in his stomach. "Chloe, the board of directors? What exactly did you say in that email?" "Only the truth," she replied smugly, turning her phone off airplane mode. "That he's violent, unticketed, and dangerous." Simultaneously, as the aircraft rolled to a final halt at the gate, a chorus of digital pings, buzzes, and chimes echoed softly through the cabin as dozens of smartphones instantly reconnected to the local cellular networks. Chloe's phone vibrated violently in her palm. She gasped in delight, immediately unlocking the screen. A notification sat at the top of her screen. "New email, Executive Board, Aero Global Holdings." "Here it is," she whispered, her thumb hovering over the screen. "The apology." She tapped the email. Her eyes scanned the subject line. Urgent. Assault and incompetence on Flight 884. She began to read the body of the text. "Dear Mrs. Harper, thank you for contacting the Executive Board. So far, so good." She smiled. "As the incoming chairman of the board and majority shareholder of Aero Global Holdings, I make it a priority to personally review severe escalations." Chloe frowned slightly. The chairman himself? She hadn't expected the chairman to answer her at 6:45 inches the morning. Still, she felt a surge of self-importance. She was getting VIP treatment. She continued reading. "I can confidently assure you that Captain Richard Davies and lead purser Sarah Jenkins acted flawlessly. They will not be terminated. In fact, I will be placing formal commendations in their personnel files." The triumphant smile on Chloe's face began to crack. Her breath hitched. "Commendations? What?" Her eyes darted to the next paragraph, her heart beginning to pound a frantic, erratic rhythm against her ribs. "As for the violent, unticketed man in Suite 1A, whom you have accused of assault and theft, I can verify with absolute certainty that his ticket was valid. I know this because I am the passenger in Suite 1A." The color drained from Chloe Harper's face so rapidly she looked as though she had been physically struck. All the air left her lungs in a sharp, involuntary gasp. The high-definition screen of her phone began to blur as her hands trembled violently. "No," she whispered, a hollow, terrified squeak escaping her throat. "No, no, no. That's a lie. That's impossible." She forced herself to keep reading, her eyes wide with mounting horror as the text laid out her absolute destruction. "Because you threatened the flight crew, disrupted the boarding process, and fabricated malicious allegations against a fellow passenger, your Diamond Elite status has been immediately revoked. Furthermore, both you and your husband are permanently banned from flying with Aero Global Holdings. Additionally, I will be reaching out to the managing partners at Harrison, Caldwell, and Shaw regarding our ongoing legal retainers. British authorities have been notified of your disruptions and will be waiting at the gate to escort you off the aircraft. Sincerely, David Henderson." Chairman of the board. Chloe dropped the phone into her lap as if it were radioactive. A wave of profound, suffocating nausea washed over her. The man she had humiliated, the man she had screamed at in the lounge, the man she had tried to falsely accuse of a federal crime to fuel her own bruised ego. He wasn't just a VIP. He owned the plane, he owned the airline, and he held her husband's entire career in the palm of his hand. "Greg," she choked out, her voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate sob. She turned to look over the divider. "Greg, please. You have to fix this." But Greg wasn't looking at her. Greg was staring at his own phone, which had just received a flurry of urgent, red-flagged emails. He had connected to his firm's secure server to check his messages before their big meetings. At exactly 6:45 a.m., his inbox had exploded. The managing partner of Harrison, Caldwell, and Shaw had forwarded him the email chain from David Henderson. Accompanying it was a direct message from the head of the firm, written in furious, panicked capital letters. "Gregory, what the hell did your wife do? Aero Global is threatening to pull the entire merger retainer. Call me the second you land. Your partnership is on the line. Greg slowly lowered his phone. The permanent slouch, the lifelong habit of apologizing for his wife, the quiet subservience, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, seething, white-hot rage that he had never felt before in his life. He turned his head and locked eyes with Chloe. He looked at her not as his wife, but as the architect of his total professional ruin. "What did you do, Chloe?" Greg whispered, his voice shaking with a terrifying, quiet intensity that was infinitely more intimidating than a shout. "I told you to let it go. I told you to sit down. You just cost my firm a $30 million account. You just cost me my career." "I didn't know," Chloe cried out, her manicured hands flying to her face as mascara-stained tears began to stream down her cheeks. "How was I supposed to know who he was? He didn't look like a chairman. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to." Greg snarled, finally raising his voice. "You arrogant, stupid woman. You just destroyed us." Before Chloe could formulate another excuse, the heavy main cabin door at the front of the aircraft was opened from the outside. A rush of damp, chilly London air swept into the cabin. Stepping onto the plane were 4 individuals, 2 officers from the Metropolitan Police Airport Command, wearing tactical vests and stern expressions, flanked by 2 Aero Global corporate security directors in high-visibility jackets. The lead police officer stepped into the first-class galley. He held a digital tablet in his hand. He didn't even glance toward Suite 1A. He looked directly at lead purser Sarah Jenkins, who subtly pointed a finger down the aisle toward row 2. The heavy, rhythmic thud of the officer's boots on the carpeted aisle sounded like a death knell to Chloe. Every passenger in the cabin held their breath. The officers stopped squarely beside Suite 2D. "Chloe Harper?" the lead officer asked, his thick British accent clipping through the silence. His tone was professional, cold, and entirely devoid of sympathy. Chloe pressed herself back against the leather seat, shaking uncontrollably. "Why, yes. But officer, you don't understand. There's been a massive misunderstanding. I am the victim. I was threatened." "Ma'am," the officer interrupted firmly, stepping closer to the suite. "We've received a detailed report from the flight captain and the corporate board regarding threatening behavior, filing false allegations, and severe interference with a flight crew. These are federal aviation offenses. We are going to need you to gather your personal belongings, unfasten your seatbelt, and come with us immediately." "No," she shrieked, the reality of the situation finally shattering her delusions. "I'm a Diamond Elite member. My husband is a lawyer. Greg, tell them." She looked at Greg, pleading for salvation. Greg slowly stood up, retrieved his own briefcase from the overhead bin, and looked down at his wife. "You're on your own, Chloe. I have to go call my managing partner and try to save my life." He didn't wait for her. He pushed past the officers and walked rapidly toward the exit. "Greg," she screamed, her voice echoing painfully through the cabin. "Ma'am," the second officer said, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. "Stand up. Now. Do not make us forcibly remove you from this aircraft." Defeated, humiliated, and utterly alone, Chloe Harper unbuckled her seatbelt. Her legs wobbled as she stood. She reached up with trembling hands to grab her oversized Louis Vuitton tote and her Chanel blazer. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had terrorized the boarding lounge just hours earlier. "Walk," the lead officer commanded, gesturing toward the front door. As the police escorted a violently sobbing Chloe down the aisle, the surrounding passengers who had endured her tantrums at the gate and her screaming match with the flight attendants watched in stunned, deeply satisfied silence. A few people even pulled out their phones, capturing the magnificent downfall of the ultimate airport bully. To exit the plane, Chloe had to walk directly past Suite 1A. David Henderson had finally stood up. He stood tall, immaculate, and entirely composed. He was placing his tablet into his leather duffel bag. As Chloe passed by, guided by the elbow by an armed police officer, she stopped for a fraction of a second. She looked up at David. Her face was a messy, tear-streaked portrait of total defeat. She looked at him, desperately waiting for him to gloat, to throw an insult at her, to twist the knife he had so expertly plunged into her life. She waited for him to act exactly the way she would have acted if she had won. But David didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply buttoned the center button of his charcoal suit jacket, looked her directly in her red, puffy eyes, and offered the exact same polite, professional, and devastatingly cold nod he had given her at the boarding gate. It was a gesture that communicated a singular, crushing truth. You are completely insignificant to me. It was the ultimate power move. A masterclass in quiet, unassailable authority. Chloe let out a pathetic whimper, hanging her head as the officers pushed her forward, marching her out of the aircraft and into the waiting arms of the British legal system. Once the aisle was clear, David picked up his bag. Sarah Jenkins and Captain Richard Davies stood by the exit door, both offering him expressions of profound respect. "Thank you for flying with us, Mr. Chairman," Captain Davies said, extending a hand. "I apologize again for the disturbance." David shook the pilot's hand firmly. "You handled it flawlessly, Richard. Thank you for your leadership tonight. Sarah, your team was exemplary." "The pleasure was entirely ours, sir," Sarah replied, a bright, genuine smile lighting up her face. David stepped off the aircraft, walking down the jet bridge and into the bustling energy of Heathrow Terminal 5. He had a board meeting to run, a multi-billion-dollar merger to finalize, and a new empire to build. He didn't look back once. The chaos of small-minded people was entirely behind him, leaving nothing but the sweet, lingering silence of hard karma in his wake. Can you believe the absolute nerve of Chloe? Sometimes, people are so blinded by their own arrogance and entitlement that they can't see the massive wall of karma they are accelerating toward. David Henderson's quiet patience in the face of such blatant disrespect is a masterclass in emotional intelligence. He knew exactly the power he held and didn't need to shout or throw a tantrum to prove it. He just let her hand him the shovel she used to dig her own professional and social grave. If you loved this story of satisfying, real-life karma and want more wild tales of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve, make sure you hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell. Have you ever witnessed an entitled passenger get put in their place? Drop your crazy airport stories in the comments below.